Is it time for the Baltimore Ravens to go get Lamar Jackson, his guy? We talk about that and so much more coming up next year on this episode of Locked On Ravens.
You are Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to another edition of Locked On Ravens, your daily Baltimore Ravens podcast. I'm your host, Kevin Oestreicher of Ravens Wire, here with you on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much for being here today, making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. We're free and available for you on all podcasting platforms. That includes in video form on YouTube, where you can like this video, subscribe to the channel. Also in audio form, wherever you get your shows. So Apple Podcasts, Spotify, we're here for you wherever you prefer to listen to your podcasts. Again, 5 days a week here of Ravens content plus bonus episodes, and we do live shows after some big Ravens news. In fact, after all Ravens news, big Ravens news. Also, we go live after games, and we're going to have some bonus episodes for you throughout the course of draft weekend, which is very quickly creeping up on us here. So we got a lot of Ravens coverage here on Locked On Ravens. Today's episode of Locked On Ravens is brought to you by Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Back here, another week means another mock draft Monday. As I just said, we're really getting close to the 2024 NFL draft, and so we are now entering the more creative mock draft Mondays. We only have 3 left, including today, which is kind of crazy to think about. Obviously, today being April 8th, and then we have April 15th, April 22nd. Then, look, by the time April 29th rolls around, the draft will be done. First day of the draft, April 25th. So what we do here on Locked On Ravens is as we get closer to the draft like this, we do use 2 of our 3 remaining mock draft Mondays to talk about a couple scenarios, 1 trade up and 1 trade down. Now, there's been a lot of conversation, especially surrounding Stephon Diggs recently, and, going to get Lamar his guy. So I decided to use the trade up portion of the mock draft Mondays this week. And we're going to talk about first in a general perspective, if it's time for the Ravens to go and get Lamar his guy, go and trade for a guy for Lamar. We're going to also get into that mock draft Monday. I talked about that, and that will, again, kind of be in the same realm as our conversation. And then in the final part of the show, we'll get to some mock drafts on Twitter. We have 1 mock draft. You see that in the thing there, mock draft from Twitter. But we're also going to get into a couple of more. But there's 1 mock draft from Twitter I do want to talk about and highlight that. And then we're going to get into some more as well. So let's talk about, is it time to get Lamar his guy? Stephon Diggs, that trade got a lot of people buzzing. A lot of people buzzing surrounding what the Ravens should do at wide receiver. Wide receiver, especially in the Lamar era, look, it's been a topic of conversation for a really long time. And we talked about this a lot last week, especially once the deal went down. And also, we've talked about it for years on this show. I've been hosting the show for almost 5 years now. And we talked about it a lot, where personally, myself, I do believe the Ravens mishandled Lamar's rookie contract in terms of going out there and getting him a wide receiver. But part of that conversation is not just about the Ravens going and getting Lamar a wide receiver. The part of that conversation is they did try, right? I'm not saying they didn't try. I'm not trying to discount that they did. They spent a lot of draft capital on wide receiver during Lamar's rookie contract. It is true. But to me, you could still have done that if you're the Ravens and tried to take at least a swing at a guy. Didn't have to be the top guy ever, top guy in the league. Didn't have to be that. But felt like even though the Ravens offense itself was not a pass-first offense, we knew that. We knew this offense under Greg Roman didn't favor wide receivers. It wasn't a wide receiver-friendly offense even. That's why Marquise Brown requested out, right? Didn't love the offense, and I don't blame him because it was not wide receiver-friendly. The passing offense went through the tight ends, and it went through the running backs, and that's not a place where a lot of wide receivers would have wanted to play. So then that opens up the whole other can of worms, which is like, well, if we're talking about right now, hey, is it time to go out there and get Lamar his guy? The offense right now, Todd Monken compared to Greg Roman. It is a more wide receiver friendly offense. And I think it is a more wide receiver friendly offense. So that begs the question of, okay, well, we've seen all these wide receivers go to different teams. Diggs going to Houston, Keenan Allen going to Chicago, Calvin Ridley getting signed from Jacksonville to Tennessee on that big money contract. I do think personally that if I were the Ravens, I would try to go out there and get Lamar, and I've said this before, a Cortland Sutton type of player. Again, he's not going to be an A.J. Brown. He's not going to be one of those top guys that we've seen move over the course of the last, 3, 4, 5 years, however long you want to put on that timeline. But I do think that there is a difference here between, spending all your money and spending all this draft capital on a guy and just going and getting somebody that can be a number 2 wide receiver, let's say. If you're sold on Zay being the one, if you're okay with having that, all right, then let's, if you're the Ravens, I'd go out there and try to find somebody who could be a complimentary number 2 guy. But if we're just going to hand the keys to Rashad Bateman, if you're Baltimore, you have to be very sure that Bateman can go and step into that role, because there's no more playing around if you're the Ravens. There shouldn't have been any in the first place, but Lamar Jackson is now 27 years old. He's entering year 7. He's in the middle of that huge contract he signed, right? So, of course, there's no more rookie deal now. And that's the thing that I think a lot of fans are like, oh, man, well, that window's closed, right? The window of Lamar being on a rookie deal is over. The Ravens invested a lot in their defense during that time, a lot in their offensive line during that time. A lot of people wish it had been more wide receiver based, but again, in a Greg Roman offense, and that's part of the failure as well, is the fact that, look, the offense worked for a time. That 2019 offense was awesome, but I do think in Todd Monken's offense, you can justify it a lot more to go out there and get Lamar a guy, but we see the Ravens go, and it just seems like the wide receiver position is not necessarily valued in terms of, well, now they had a decision back with Marquise Brown. And I had honestly had this conversation on the show. It was, well, when Marquise is up for an extension, are they going to pay him whatever that was going to be at the time, right? 15 per season, 20 million per season. Were they going to pay him that money? And at that time in that offense, my answer was no. Like, of course they're not going to pay him that money, because why would you invest that money at a position that doesn't matter to your offense? I mean, we can just call it what it is. I think at this point, it's difficult to kind of put it into words, because I think that for me, where I am with guys like Rashad Bateman and the offense as a whole right now, is I think those guys can all produce, right? I'm a big believer in Zay. I've always been a big Rashad Bateman guy, but I do think it doesn't hurt, right? Michael Gallup is a veteran, but it feels like that cycle of just what the Ravens have brought in the past. Now, the reality of the situation for Baltimore is they have a lot of holes to fill on this roster. If we're talking about, it's easy, go out there and get a wide receiver. It's unfortunately not that easy, where you do have to look at the edge position, even with Kyle Van Noy back in the fold now. That's another position you got to look at. With inside linebacker, are you confident enough in Trenton Simpson where you're not going to bring in another veteran, not named Chris Board? We're going to see. The big one obviously being the offensive line, where they're down 3 starters. Are they going to invest some money there? They have a lot of holes to fill. Now, to me, wide receiver or edge does seem the most feasible to go out there and spend the quote-unquote remaining of your cap dollars if you're Baltimore. But I've been kind of shouting it from the rooftops for a while. I'm sure a lot of other fans have too. It's the fact that, look, we've seen all these other quarterbacks go and get their guy from their teams. And again, to Baltimore's credit, in terms of where they spent their draft capital, it was a first-round pick on Marquise Brown in 2019, first-round pick on Rashad Bateman in 2021. They obviously spent a bunch of mid-round picks as well in terms of Devin Duvernay, Miles Boykin, Tylan Wallace, right? That they did that. But we can look back on the past and say, yeah, that offense just was never going to be able to support a wide receiver, right? Stephon Diggs comes to Baltimore, let's say in 2020, right? Let's say 2021. He complains. I'm sure he complains every single week because he's getting 2 targets. He's getting paid all this money, and he's getting 2 to 4 targets a game, and that's not what Stephon Diggs wants, right? That Lamar would be awesome if he was in that offense, but again, it's just kind of been the conversation surrounding Baltimore where it's a run-first team, and there's nothing wrong with that, but in terms of, especially in the Roman offense, it was never going to be able to support a top-tier receiver, and that, again, is part of what the problem was. Now in Todd Monken's offense, I believe you can support one of those veteran top-tier wide receivers. It's just a matter of, well, how can you spend the money, and are you able to spend the money on a wide receiver? So, look, I think that Baltimore, if it was up to me, if I was in charge, I would try to go out there and get Lamar, that veteran guy that, is not in the Michael Gallup, Josh Reynolds tier. I'd try to go and trade for that guy. Denver made it clear they weren't trading Cortland Sutton, but I'm just saying someone like that. So in the second part of the show, I'm going to be talking a little bit about, we're going to be talking fully about my mock draft that I did for this week's episode of Mock Draft Monday. I'm going to be diving into why I did what I did. It's sure to be controversial, but we're ready for it. I'm ready for it. Stay tuned. Lots to get to here on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is brought to you by Gametime. There have been plenty of frustrating ticket buying experiences in my life. Sometimes I wasn't necessarily sure if the seats were good. Sometimes I couldn't find last-minute tickets. Sometimes there were no good deals, especially with some MLB games. So Gametime is now an authorized ticket marketplace in Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets even faster and easier. Prices on the Gametime app actually go down the closer it gets to first pitch. With current last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and the lowest price guarantee, Gametime takes the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets. Now, on the Gametime app, there are plenty of upcoming MLB games, other concerts as well. The Gametime app has everything on there. The Orioles, I know it was a rough series against the Pirates this weekend, but the Orioles are going to be a good team this year, and I'm going to be getting a bunch of tickets to go to games on Gametime. The features that they have on the Gametime app, they're incredible. They have last-minute deals, flash deals, zone deals, all-in pricing, seat views. The seat views are my favorite because you get the whole panoramic view from your seat in the app before you actually buy. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Down the Gametime app, create an account and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL, spelled LOCKEDO on NFL for $20 off. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guarantee. We're back for our second segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Oestreicher still talking with you here on this Monday. I will give the health update. If you're new to the show, I was battling and still am battling a very nasty sickness. Was really bad last week, especially during the bonus episodes we did last weekend. I appreciate all the kind comments, the support. This is now episode 1,221 consecutively. I've done on the show, mentioned earlier, been hosting it for almost 5 years. Have not missed a single episode, and I was not going to let the sickness end up impacting that streak. So I feel a lot better. I'm very happy. I feel a lot better. Still got a little bit of a cough going on, but the stuffiness is all but gone, and it's been a long week and some change. So hoping to kind of just get the rest of it behind me. But again, I just wanted to say I really do appreciate the kind words and the support and all the well wishes. So we're getting behind it, but still a little bit more recovery to go there. Let's get into Mock Draft Monday. Again, only 3 left, including today still. I mentioned that earlier. It's kind of crazy to think about how close we are to the draft actually coming up and sneaking up fully on us. And Baltimore currently 9 picks. Now, we're not going to go over 9 picks today because I ended up doing something a little bit different. And again, these last 3 mock draft Mondays are going to be a little different. So we're doing my trade up scenario this week. We'll do a trade down scenario next week. And then we'll do my final predictions for the mock draft, or for, I guess, the regular draft with a mock draft in the final week of Mock Draft Monday there. So this is the trade up one. Again, it goes hand in hand with our conversation we just had about it's a time to go and get Lamar, his guy, the guy almost. And not that Zay can't be that guy, but I'm saying, the touted top 10 prospect. And that's kind of where it goes, right? Because a lot of people, when they think about, okay, well, what does getting the guy mean? A lot of people say, okay, well, that means trade for a vet. But if you go out there and you get one of these top guys in the draft, I mean, look, technically Baltimore did do it last year with Zay, but there was not a consensus like top 10 guy in that draft class. Obviously, Jackson Smith-Njigba, who went to Seattle, was the top guy in that class, technically, who went, just a couple picks earlier to Seattle. There was actually that run on receivers Baltimore was a part of. So let's get into who I picked here, and then I'll also get into the trade because this was a controversial one. I think actually, to be fair, it got a lot better of a response than I thought it would. I think my mindset was people were just so hung up, or they are so hung up on the offensive line. It's you traded all these picks for a wide receiver. What are you doing? But it was actually a lot more well-received than I thought. So I ended up trading the 30th pick, the 62nd pick, the 113th pick, and the 130th pick to the Jacksonville Jaguars. I got pick 17, and I picked Rome Odunze out of Washington. Now, there's a lot of controversy about just, out of the big three, Odunze, Neighbors, and Marvin Harrison Jr., who the top guy is, who the second guy is. Look, I think to me, my rankings, Marvin Harrison Jr. is number one. I like Neighbors a lot. I think he comes in at number two, and then Odunze is like slightly below him at number three. But there's not a scenario. And again, this is more so a case of take what the mock draft simulator gives you again, because I don't think Odunze falls out of the top 10. But him at 17 is a steal. It's almost kind of like the Kyle Hamilton conundrum you had a couple of years ago if you're the Ravens, where there's no way this guy should be falling this much. Or are you going to kind of wait to see? And look, Odunze is not making it to 30. I just want to kind of shut down those dreams right now. I'd love it, but it's not happening. But Odunze is kind of like the typical player that Baltimore needs. He's a bigger bodied player who can go up there. The leaping ability is great. He does have the speed. He's not the fastest receiver in the world, but he's the blend of like athleticism, and he's just such a well-rounded prospect that he's the perfect, like, he and Zay Flowers, just imagining them in the same offense together. And even if you want to throw Bateman's name in this conversation too, if you want to just talk about what next year could be, Odunze, Flowers, and Bateman with a veteran on top of that, then you go get a Gallup. That's a really good wide receiver room. Now, Bleacher Report had Baltimore. There was an article, was, the weakest wide receiver groups after the Stephon Diggs trade, obviously, highlighting Buffalo and everything after they traded away Diggs. Baltimore had the seventh weakest group. And obviously Mark Andrews, they gave the Ravens credit for having Mark Andrews, but outside of Zay Flowers, they said it's a very weak and underwhelming group. And, I would have to agree. I think if Bateman can turn it up next year, then we can revisit the conversation. But there's just a lot of potential in that room and not a lot of proven ability. I mean, Zay was awesome last year, so that's some of the provenness, and that's a second-year guy. So Odunze is another player who, again, will not have the quote-unquote NFL experience, but if he can go and have a Zay-type rookie season, even surpass that Zay rookie season, I don't think it matters if it's Odunze or Courtland Sutton or whatever. If the guy can produce, the guy can produce. Odunze 100% can go out there and produce, in my opinion. So I'm all on board if Odunze falls in that range. Even, I think I saw a comment on the mock draft here where anywhere here, 30th pick, Brian Thomas Jr. here, Steven, who says, be on the phone every pick after 15 if Rome or BTJ, Brian Thomas Jr., fall that far. And to me, again, it's like, well, you're giving up 4 picks for one. Baltimore has 9 right now, so I felt a little more comfortable doing that. But I do understand the sentiment if someone said, look, that's a great pick, but what about the offensive line? Which, by the way, look, I did end up covering. So Ravens didn't have a second-round pick in this scenario, but with number 93, this was a big one for me because I really wanted to get one of those top remaining tackles in the third round. And Kieran Amedaji ends up falling to me out of Yale. And I was very pleased to see Kieran fall to me here. It's so tough to predict when guys will actually go. It feels like people go a lot earlier than I anticipate them to. I don't think Kieran falls this far, but this is like the perfect pick in the third round. If you were to move that draft capital and you still have a need on the offensive line, if you're Baltimore, Kieran's a perfect guy for this. Obviously, there's versatility there. He's a big guy too. So I think that he versus Daniel Faalele, I'd be totally fine with that competition. Kieran versus Faalele for the starting right tackle job. I know some people might feel a little wary about that, but honestly, I'd be okay. And then at 165, I actually took Javon Foster, another offensive lineman, this time from Missouri. I think Kieran and Javon Foster, both those guys, I don't think Javon falls that far either. I mean, again, this is like, okay, wow, I'm going to take this because the mock draft simulator gave it to me. This, to me, I think is a really, really solid pick. Both those guys, honestly. It makes up for the fact that you do lose out on both the early round and the mid-round value with some of your picks like 62, 113, etc. Then at number 218, Miles Harden, the corner from South Dakota, was the pick. We talked about him last week. I think the versatility is there. Corner is still a need for them with Brandon Stevens not signed to an extension and Ronald Darby gone. So I think that he could slot in. Eric Watts, edge from UConn, is the pick. The Kyle Van Noy, we talked about this for Friday's episode about how it kind of changes Baltimore's draft strategy a little bit, where Watts is more of a developmental piece. And again, 228, more developmental guys anyway. But Watts is a really solid piece that I still think could make some level of an impact depending, but you're not expecting too much. And then Amani Bailey, running back from TCU, is the pick for me at 250. So I ended up kind of going with, now Bailey's a shorter prospect, stands around 5'7", but he can kind of be somebody that you can utilize as your third running back behind Derrick Henry and Justice Hill before Keaton Mitchell comes back. Then once Keaton comes back, you can slot Bailey into the fourth running back slot pretty seamlessly, and that would be that. So I love the Odunze pick. I love Kieran being there at 93, Javon Foster as well. Those top three to me, I think were really important picks, especially the top one. But look, if the Ravens were to go and make that move up, crazier things have happened. I'm not necessarily predicting it, but we're going to see what happens as well. Coming up, we're going to be talking about some mock drafts from Twitter, so be sure to stay tuned. We got a lot coming to you still on Locked On Ravens. First, this show is sponsored by BetterHelp. What's the first thing you do if you had an extra hour in your day? Would you go for a run? Would you take a nap, read a book, show up for a friend? A lot of us spend our lives wishing we had more time. The question is, time for what? Time was unlimited. How would you use it? The best way to squeeze that special thing into your schedule is to know what's important to you and make it a priority. Therapy can help you find what matters to you so you can do more of it. Therapy has so many benefits, such as learning positive coping skills, how to set boundaries. It can empower you to become the best version of yourself, and it isn't just for those who've experienced major trauma. It's for everyone. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. All you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist and switch therapists anytime for no additional charge. Learn to make time for what makes you happy with BetterHelp. Visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOn to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/LockedOn. We are back, our final segment of Locked On Ravens. Kevin Allstriker still talking with you here on this Monday. Really appreciate everybody for being here today and making Locked On Ravens your first listen each and every day. Again, we're 5 days a week plus more of daily Ravens content, even in the offseason. So we do not miss out on any weekdays, even when we are not in season for the Ravens. So we talk about free agency. We talk about the draft. Even after the draft is over, we start getting ready for next season. So 5 days a week Ravens coverage. Be sure to hit that like button and subscribe on YouTube. Follow along in audio format as well. Really appreciate the audio community, the video community, subtext community, social media community. We got a lot of great communities here on Locked On Ravens, and I'm just so appreciative of it all. Now let's get into some mock drafts from Twitter. Now the one that I wanted to highlight here is from Steven, 30th pick, Brian Thomas. And this is one that's interesting. Now, he says, just because Jalen Wright at 62 ruffled feathers on Ravens Twitter this week, and he's one of my favorite players in the draft. First 3 picks are actually just my favorite players at their respective positions. Rest are guys I don't think get enough love. Oh, and BTR. Yes, Brian Thomas Jr. Steven's been on the Brian Thomas Jr. train. So Brian Thomas Jr. is the pick in number 30. But Jalen Wright, the running back from Tennessee in the second round here. So that's what I wanted to kind of highlight and talk about a little bit. We'll read through the rest first here. Mason McCormick, South Dakota State guard at 93. Elijah Jones, Boston College corner at 113. Javon Foster, Missouri tackle at 130. Brennan Jackson, Washington State edge at 182. Now, the trade to get 182 was 165 for 182, 227, and 242. Brandon Coleman, TCU tackle at 218. Dominic Hampton, Washington safety at 227. Delmar Glaze, tackle from Maryland at 228. Jordan McGee, Temple linebacker at 242. And Steve Linton at Texas Tech edge at 250. Now, for me, and this is my policy, and I will stay true to my policy, running back for me in this draft class, to me, there is not a player worth taking for Baltimore on the first 2 days. Now, Jalen Wright could easily go in the second round. I anticipate him to go in the third, But I think where my running back clock starts for the Ravens, especially considering their need, is probably 113 in the 4th round. And that's because they've signed Derrick Henry and investing high capital in free agency and high capital in the draft. It is worth doing that for a lot of different positions, but running back is not necessarily quote unquote a premium position like a wide receiver or an edge or an offensive line or a corner, one of those things. So I don't hate Jalen Wright as a prospect, right? It's not about him as a prospect, but, and again, this is more so, I know Steven just said it's because he's ruffling feathers. And there were a lot of people talking about Jalen Wright and taking running backs in the 2nd, 3rd round. But to me, I'm taking Jalen Wright if he's available at 113. It's the same thing with guys like Blake Corum, et cetera. It's kind of the same boat for me. Brian Thomas Jr., I don't expect him to be there at 30, but again, you take what the mock draft simulator gives you. But that is the mid-round trade down, which is super interesting to me here because Baltimore already has 9 picks. With this trade, Baltimore would have 11 picks. And I don't know if 11 rookies can make this roster. I think if we saw something like this, I think Eric DeCosta would try to maybe package like 242 and 228 or 228 and 227 and try to move up a little bit more with those picks. So again, I don't hate the trade down at all. I'm just saying that 11 rookies, and they're going to need a lot of rookies and guys on rookie contracts. That's just the way that their roster can have to be constructed now with Lamar and his deal and all these big money contracts coming in. But it is interesting to kind of think about, well, how many rookies could realistically make this roster considering, I mean, look, we know Baltimore's lost a lot of players, and I'm not sure they're going to necessarily replace all of them in free agency. So what would that lead to? A bigger draft class, probably. So I would not necessarily be shocked if it was a bigger draft class than I'm anticipating right now, but we're going to find out. We're going to see how it works out for him here. We have one from Nate now who says traded back and filled pretty much every need. Format doesn't fit on the page. Yeah, it's all right. I know some of these sites, it can get weird, Nate. But let's see. Xavier Legette, wide receiver from South Carolina at 42. Kalen Carson, corner from Wake Forest at 65. Kieran Emegdaji, the offensive lineman from Yale at 93. Braylon Allen, running back from Wisconsin at 102. Brandon Coleman, guard from TCU at 113. Jonah Ellis, edge from Utah at 119. Tyke Smith, safety from Georgia at 130. Maris Laufu, the linebacker from Notre Dame, is at 159. Joe Milton III, quarterback from Tennessee, is at 178. Carlton Johnson, Fresno State corner at 218. Drake Nugent, offensive center, the center from Michigan at 228. And Evan Anderson, defensive lineman from FAU at 250. Also, this is good from Nate here, a 2025 Seattle first and a 2025 Seattle second from Mike McDonald and company over there in Seattle. So I like that. Look, if you're telling me the Ravens can trade back essentially 12 spots, pick up Xavier Legette, who I think is very much so on the cusp of like very, very, very late first to early second, like that T. Higgins, Michael Pittman Jr. range. You can get him. And then you can also pick up both 2025, a Seattle first and a Seattle second. Man, that is a good haul. I love Legette personally. He'd be the perfect trade down candidate for me where Baltimore can pick up one of those first 3 picks in the second round. He's a perfect target there. We've talked about Kalen. We've talked about a lot of these guys on the show, actually. Nate and I are on the same wavelength here. Talked about Kieran earlier, obviously. Kalen Carson we've talked about. Braylon Allen was working out with Derrick Henry. There was a photo that surfaced. Maybe that's something to come. 102. I'll allow it. I'll allow 102. It's in the middle of 93 and 113. I'll allow running back at 102. I'm a big Braylon Allen guy too. So I'll allow that. Jonah Ellis, I think, would be a really nice mid-round edge prospect. Same thing with Tyke Smith for a safety. I like this draft a lot. And again, the trade back to me, we're going to talk about this more in depth next week, but it just makes a lot of sense in a lot of different ways, whether it be the actual depth of the class at a lot of different position and need for Baltimore or them just accumulating more picks in general. So I like that one from Nate. Then let's get into one from ESG, who has the Ravens taking Adonai Mitchell, wide receiver from Texas at 30. Roger Rosengarten, offensive tackle from Washington at 62. Dominic Pooney, the guard from Kansas at 93. Jaux Hunt, the edge from Houston Christian at 113. Kyrie Jackson, corner from Oregon at 130. Zach Zinter, guard from Michigan at 165. Omar Spates, linebacker from LSU at 218. Amani Bailey, running back from TCU at 228, and Kyle Hergel, guard from Boston College, at 250. Mitchell is 30. If Mitchell's there at 30, I think you almost run that card up. He's that good. I don't think he falls that far, unfortunately, but he'd be awesome in the Ravens offense, in my opinion. You get 4 offensive linemen in this draft. I maybe instead of like a Zinter or a Hergel, maybe I'd go and take another corner. I love Kyrie Jackson. He's one of my favorite players in this entire class, so I'm all on board with Kyrie Jackson at 130. I think he's more of a second, third round guy, but you know what, you take what the mock draft simulator gives you. Bailey, we talked about. I think he'd be a perfect late round. Him, Kimani Vidal, some of those guys. I'd like those guys as maybe back end running back prospects you can get a little later with a pick there. And then you get the edge player, corner. This hits on a lot of needs here from ESG. Wide receiver, double dip at offensive line, edge, corner. Boom. Right there are your big 4 needs all off the board. So I like this draft a lot from ESG. That's all I have here today, though, on Locked On Ravens. Really appreciate everybody tuning in. We'll be right back here tomorrow talking more Ravens, so be sure to stay tuned. I'll see you right back here tomorrow on Locked On Ravens.